Oh my God, today is such an important day for humanity. Today, 16th of April 2025, because we have finally discovered what a woman is. Yep, it's official. Today, the UK Supreme Court has ruled that a woman in the Equalities Act 2010 means biological female. The UK's highest civil court ruled unanimously that woman and sex in the Equalities Act refer to biological sex, someone born female. This came from an appeal filed by a group called For Women Scotland. For as in FOR, for the benefit of women. For Women Scotland. Appeal against a decision by the Scottish government that a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. And anyone who understands how language works will know that that's not a satisfactory definition, because it's a circular definition. When you describe something as anything that is described as that thing, then you're not defining it. It's like saying a chair is anything you call a chair. So this was the logic that they went to the Supreme Court to question, to challenge, and today they won their case. Prior to today's ruling, anybody could identify as either sex using a gender recognition certificate, a GRC. So a man could identify as a woman and provide proof using the GRC. But today's ruling has overturned that and doesn't recognize gender recognition certificates as the truth, but your biological sex as the true determinant of your gender. And I talk about this in more detail in a video that I posted 4 months ago about what went on in the courtroom during that hearing. So if you'd like to watch that, I'll put it at the end of this video. So what is the real world impact of this ruling? Well, it means that single sex spaces like refuges, women's refuges, changing rooms, and women's sports are legally protected based on biological sex. So hopefully it means that we won't have situations like we did last year's Olympics in the boxing, where 2 biological males had beaten all the females to be the 2 finalists. Yeah, that was crazy, wasn't it? And funnily enough, this same scenario played out again here in the UK within the last month in a women's pool tournament, where the 2 finalists competing to be the winner and the top runner-up, who beat all the women in the competition, were both biological males. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how sports, the world of sports, changes as a result of this ruling. Because there is a trans category, right, that athletes can enter. So it'll be interesting to see how many trans women, biological males identifying as women, will enter that competition instead. So I'd say this is a big win for women's sports, because for the last few years it's been increasingly disheartening for young women who've trained for years to compete in tournaments where they don't stand a chance against biological males with a physical advantage over them. And so many great athletes dropped out. And what kind of a message is that to send to young women, that on the one hand, while the left bangs on about patriarchy and male privilege and all that, they are silent over the unfairness that they, in fact, in many cases, they were cheering it on. They were cheering on the fact that biological males who were coming in at number 400 could then suddenly identify as women and win championships. So a great victory for women, female athletes around the world. And understandably, trans activists and influencers around the world, as well as organizations like the Pink News, are all up in arms, saying how unfair this is. But I would say it's the opposite. It's bringing back fairness. And nobody's taking the right to compete away from trans athletes. They'll just have to compete in their own heats. Which, how is that unfair? And I would watch, wouldn't you? In a similar vein, back in the day, in the early 2000s, I don't know when it ended or even if it still happens nowadays. I doubt it. I don't think it would be acceptable today. But there used to be something called the 100-meter high heel tranny dash. I didn't make up that name, by the way, if you're listening to this, because I know you're not supposed to say tranny, but that was the official name of the event. The 100-meter high heel tranny dash. It was an LGBT event that would take place in East London every year, out on the street at night, where a bunch of cross-dressers, transvestites, in high heels and evening gowns and faux furs and handbags would compete in a 100-meter sprint. Oh my God, it's the most fabulous sporting event you could ever witness. And we had a sense of humor about these things back in those days. It was good fun, and it was a bit of a piss take, but it was a sporting event. It was a competitive sporting event. And it makes me think of the interesting line that seems to have been lost, because there's a clear line between cross-dressing, transvestitism, and transgenderism and transsexualism. These are all different things, but over the last few years it's all been thrown together under the single trans term. And this is part of the problem, because the issue of trans men identifying as women and entering women's spaces was never really, it wasn't a problem before, when they were genuine trans women who genuinely just wanted to live their life as women and weren't trying to draw attention to themselves. And they have always used women's bathrooms without any problem, because they do so with respect. But then when you get men who are not transsexuals or transgender, but just cross-dressers, in many cases with a fetish, sexual fetish, and some of these men were even predatorial men who used this cover of being able to identify as women to access women's spaces as predators. That's when it all became really murky and controversial and upset a lot of women, understandably so. And it was this blurring of the lines between transgenderism, transsexualism, and transvestitism, which are all different things. So this also played out in RuPaul's Drag Race. I remember when they tried to cancel RuPaul, an LGBT icon who paved the way for so many after him. When he raised an issue, he had a concern about trans women entering RuPaul's Drag Race, because it's a drag race. Drag is an art form where men dress as women, but they don't identify as women. They're just doing it as an art. And that was what RuPaul's Drag Race was all about. Who performed their art best. And RuPaul initially expressed concern over trans women with an advantage because they may have had surgery and they were on hormones, so they had an unfair advantage over all the other contestants. RuPaul expressed a concern for the fairness of allowing them to enter the drag race because they're not drag, are they? If you are a trans woman, you're a biological male who identifies as a woman and lives your life every day as a woman. It's not cross-dressing, right? And surely this was the argument that the left or the trans activists were putting forward all along, that trans women are women. And yet for the purpose of RuPaul's Drag Race, they were saying, oh no, they're still men dressing up as women, so yes, they can compete with the other transvestites. But you can't have it both ways, right? If you're gonna say that trans women are women, then they're not performing drag. They're just women competing with drag queens. So it got very murky, this debate, and they tried to cancel RuPaul, but in the end, he had to back down and allow trans women in Drag Race, and they competed with their unfair advantage, you could argue, against biological males who didn't live their day-to-day life as women and weren't on hormones and didn't have surgery. So it would be interesting to see what happens to, well, actually, no, this ruling in the UK doesn't affect RuPaul's Drag Race because that's in America. But we do have a British version. There's a British Drag Race. What do you think, though? Was RuPaul right to initially raise concerns about trans women entering Drag Race? Do you think they should have been allowed to enter? And if so, how does that impact the argument that trans women are women? Are they women when it's convenient for them to be women, but when they need to be men in order to compete against other drag queens as men who are dressed up as women, then they're men? Can you have it both ways and just kind of switch back and forth when it suits? But back to the issue of rights, trans rights, because this is the area where all of the LGBTQ plus activists and organizations like Stonewall and Pink News are up in arms that they feel that this ruling is an infringement on trans rights. But the ruling doesn't actually remove any protections. Trans protections remain. So trans people are still covered under the gender reassignment clause of the Act. So you still cannot legally discriminate against trans people on the basis of their gender identity. So what rights are being removed? The only rights that they're losing is the right to compete against women in women's events because of their unfair advantage. This also changes rules in healthcare and workplace policies. For example, there was a British nurse who recently got suspended for misgendering a trans patient. So that nurse is now going to be protected. So that's the issue of rights, isn't it? I suppose, but I don't believe that takes any rights away from trans people. As well as healthcare, this also affects policing, because prior to this new ruling, trans women would search females, like pat them down, and trans men would search men. So when I say trans women, I mean biological males who identify as female would search females, and same with biological females who identify as males, they would search males. But under this new ruling, it will no longer be allowable for trans women to pat down females. So that's going to be interesting, isn't it? Because if there were two trans police officers working together, a trans man and a trans woman, and they had to search a female, the trans woman who looks like a woman won't be able to search that female. It will be the trans man who, trans men, a lot of them are very convincing. So he will just look like an ordinary dude. He will be the one to legally search the woman. I wonder how women would respond to that. Interesting. And if it was a man they had to search, it would be the trans woman, the biological male, who identifies as a woman and most likely looks like a woman, who'll have to search the man. But I think it will be a very different scenario for men, because I think most men would rather be patted down by a woman than by another man. Men and women are very different in this regard. Women obviously don't want to be patted down. Well, I don't know. Here's one for the public. You tell me, women listening to this, would you rather be patted down by a female officer or a male officer? I still think most women would rather be patted down by a female officer. Well, depending, of course, on how attractive the male officer is, though, right? But I guarantee you, most blokes would rather be patted down by a woman than by another dude. So yeah, let me put this survey out there for you guys. Let me know in the comments, who would you rather be patted down by? But you know, these are important issues, aren't they? These are important factors for us to consider now, because it changes everything now, this ruling. And same with toilets, right? Because we've, right till now, a trans woman would go into the women's toilets, and that would be the correct place for them to do their wee-wees. But now, technically, they're no longer welcome in women's toilets legally. But the toilet issue is a really complicated one, and I don't think that there's any clear answer to it, because prior to all of this being a political issue, I remember my trans friends had no issues going to the toilet. If they looked like a woman, and they did, the trans women I knew were gorgeous, and nobody would bat an eyelid. They just went into the women's and nobody had an issue with it. And I think that's how it should be, right? If you pass, you go to the toilet where you pass, if you know what I mean. If you have a beard and you're not even wearing lipstick, then obviously you don't belong in the women's, right? I think it should be, personally, I don't think that it's something that you could make a black and white rule. I don't think passing trans women who make an effort and who are respectful should be denied access to women's restrooms, because I do think that's where they belong. But it's the ones that are clearly taking advantage of the law, well, up until the law changed, the predatory ones that shouldn't be allowed in women's spaces. So I suppose the law protects against that happening, because the trans women who pass will still be able to go into the women's if they pass, right? And it's only if somebody raises the alarm where they have to prove their identity that becomes an issue. So I suppose there is the risk of that, but I would say there's an expectation on the individual to make that decision, to be honest with themselves. Just look in the mirror, be honest with yourself, and determine which restroom you should use. And if it's really not clear, then use the disabled restroom. I know you're not supposed to, it's meant for disabled people, but really, there should be gender neutral toilets everywhere, right? That's how you solve this issue. You know, individual cubicles that are not designated male or female. That would solve this issue entirely, right? I've worked in corporations where there's just a row of cubicles and they're not gendered and they're all private. You know, that's how it should be. I suppose they can't install these overnight everywhere. So this is why we need laws at this stage and a bit of common sense. Anyway, there you have my thoughts on today's landmark ruling by the UK Supreme Court that the definition of a woman under the 2010 Equality Act is somebody who was born biologically female. Let me know if you agree with my thoughts or disagree. Either way, I'm open to hearing your opinions. I will not attack you for disagreeing with me. And as ever, do please give this video a like. And if you're not already doing so, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps my performance as a new content creator. And it'll just take you 1 second if you do it right now. I'll wait. Oh, and thank you. And if you enjoyed this video, do watch this one too. In this one, I talk about what went down in the courtroom that day 4 months ago when this case was heard. And it's very informative and quite entertaining. Thank you very much.